Today I'm going to show you how to make these amazing scrap yarn punch needle artworks. I'll tell you all my favourite tools and materials, and I'll teach you how to get started punching. I'll show you my secrets for creating these beautiful wavy designs, then I'll run you through how to finish them off so you too can create your own scrappy masterpiece. My favourite punch needle is the Oxford No. 10 regular, but I also love the Lavore ergonomic 5.5mm. For square or rectangular work, I recommend a snap frame, or for round pieces, I like to use a non-slip hoop. There's a ridge and a valley along the inside of these hoops that helps lock your fabric in and keep it nice and tight. And then when I'm done, I like to display my round pieces in a bamboo hoop because I think it looks really nice. You'll also need a piece of monk's cloth that fits your frame or your hoop. And lastly, you need the yarn. I've got a bunch of scraps here that are 14 or 16 ply, which is also called bulky or super bulky. To set up for a round piece, undo the hoops and get your fabric and lay it across the inner hoop. Then put the outer hoop over the top of this and tighten the screw while pulling on the fabric to make sure it's nice and tight in the frame. Keep pulling the fabric in the hoop to make it nice and tight, and then tightening the nut at the top. You want your fabric to be as tight as you can get it here. To start with the rectangular one, put together your snap frame and then lay the fabric over the inner part of the frame. Then getting the clamps, put the first one on at the bottom. Make sure you've got enough fabric underneath so you can pull this around. Then take the opposite clamp and put this on the top section, making sure that your fabric is being pulled tight as you do so. Then put both the side clamps on in just the same way. You want your fabric here to be nice and tight as well. Now, to thread your Oxford needle, pinch your yarn in the tip of your fingers and poke this through the hole in the tip of the needle from the inside to the outside. Then run the length of the yarn down the channel and pull this down so it's sitting neatly in the channel. And that's it. To thread the Lavore needle, you're going to use the threader that comes with the needle, pinch this and push it through the needle from the top to the bottom. Then take your yarn and put it in the hole at the end of the threader, and then pull this through the needle. Then take the tip of the yarn and push this through the hole in the tip of the needle from the inside to the outside. These Lavore needles are also adjustable. All you do is twist the needle, push it down and then clip it into place to get a different length. The longer the needle is at the top, the larger your loops will be. To start punching, we're going to take our needle and make one wavy line in the middle. I don't like to start right at the edge of the piece, so I'm going to start in here a little bit in from the edge. To start, take your needle and poke it through the fabric as far as it goes. Flip your work over and then pull through the little tail of yarn to the other side. Then holding your needle with the channel facing the direction that you're going to be punching, lift it out of the fabric just high enough so you can glide it along the surface, then move forward 3 spaces in the cloth. Go down into the fabric as far as the needle lets you, then pull your needle out and then move forward another 3 spaces. Make sure you don't lift this up out of the fabric too high. Continue punching along like this, trying to keep your length of the stitches consistent. When you want to start pivoting your work, make sure that you turn your needle with you so that the channel and the front of the needle is always facing in the direction that you're going. And this is what's happening underneath the fabric. Every time you go in, it makes a little loop the exact same height as all the other ones. If you make a mistake or decide you don't like a section you've punched, all you have to do is pull out your stitches. Then take the tip of your needle and graze across the surface to put the fabric back into position. Then pull the end of your yarn so it tightens up in the needle again and start from where you left off. You're going to want to stop about ½ an inch from the edge of the frame. Maybe draw a border in pencil or a fine Sharpie to help guide you. When you reach the edge, turn your frame around and then head back in the other direction. Make sure you pivot your needle when it's in the fabric so that the opening is facing the direction you're now going to be going. Then continue punching along next to the stitches you've already done. When you get to the other end, turn your needle around just like we did before and head back to the spot where we first started our stitches. Then flip your work over, take your scissors and trim off the yarn at the back of the needle. Here you can see how I've stacked the stitches when I've done the 2 rows next to each other, kind of like a brickwork pattern. And on the back you can see the tails of the yarn where I started off and ended. Then I'll load another colour into my needle and start doing the same again. For this orange, I'm going to work right along next to the purple stitches that I've already done. If your yarn tail is too long on the underside, you can pull it back through the needle slightly to make this yarn tail shorter. This will help create less waste for your scraps. The beauty of using these yarn scraps is sometimes you have to leave it to chance to figure out where your colour's going to end. Here, my orange yarn finished with the tail automatically going to the underside of the work. For this next colour, I'm going to start in a different position. I find doing this really helps with creating more organic wave shapes. When you're creating your patterns, try to have a lot of variety with how big the waves are and the direction that they go in. You'll see for this yellow, I've gone in an opposite direction than the red before. Alternating the placement of these waves helps create a lot of movement and interest in your work. When you've done some of your bigger waves that crisscross over each other, you'll need to start filling in smaller sections. Here I'm working on filling in this small section that's being created. I like to do combinations of one single row of a colour, then 2 rows of the next colour. You can see here how the wave patterns are starting to form. I'm trying to think carefully about how I'm creating the shapes, but I'm trying to choose my colours almost at random to create a really fun effect. Here's how the work built up row by row. Then, after a lot of punching and a lot of yarn scraps, I finished the whole frame. To create a neat edge, for some colours I do a stitch down before heading back the other way, and others I just pivot and go straight back. At the top I filled in these spaces to make a straight edge. For this piece I'm going to display the flat stitches as the final product, but we could also neaten up the backside and display the loops instead. And here is the end of punching up the circle frame. I used the exact same techniques as I showed you before. I just made sure that all my stitches stayed within a 1/2 inch border around the frame. For this one, I'm going to display the loops as the front side, so I wasn't too concerned about making sure my stitches were right next to each other on the flat side. Here you can see the little gaps where I might have been a little bit off from being right next to the other stitches. But on the loopy side, you can't even tell. You may notice amongst all these yarn ends that I decided to use a few different height loops for my stitches. I thought this would create some nice detail and interest. Now we need to neaten up the loopy side. Pull a yarn end up and snip it off at the base so it's the same height as the loops around it. Do this for all the yarn ends that you see. The great thing about punch needle is the yarn is held in place through the tension of the fabric and all the loops next to each other, so you don't need to tie any of these ends off. Here's the loopy side with all the yarn ends trimmed off. You'll notice that the definition between some of the lines is a little bit messy, with sections from either colour bleeding into each other. To neaten this up, I take a pair of scissors and move around these loops so that they're sitting in their original rows more neatly. This is a bit time consuming, but it makes such a difference to the finished product. Now, to figure out the perfect presentation of these punch needle pieces, I've decided I'm going to use the loops of the circle one as the front side, and for the rectangular piece I'm going to use the flat stitches, as I think there's a lot of really lovely definition in these colours. I'm going to frame the rectangular piece in this frame that I got from IKEA. I made my punch needle a little bit longer than I needed to, but the width of this frame is just perfect. Starting at the middle of one side, hold your fabric inside the frame and then flip this over and take your staple gun and staple this into the inside of the frame. You want to make sure your staple is quite close to the front of the frame. Then stretch your fabric across and do a staple on the opposite side, making sure this is nice and taut. Then work your way around and pull your fabric tight, adding staples in every ½ inch or so. At the bottom, I'll fold under this excess here and then remove some of these strands of yarn that I didn't need to punch in the first place. Then, when everything's stapled into the frame, fold the extra fabric neatly in. I'm going to add in a few little scraps here in case something ever happens to this artwork and I need to do a few repairs. Then take the backing board and place this down, then fold over the pins to hold it in place. And there is your finished framed punch needle piece. I love using frames to display these because I think it makes it look so neat and professional. To display my round piece, I'm going to use my bamboo hoop. Open this up and then lay your piece onto the inner hoop, making sure you get this the right way up that you want to display it. Then take your outer hoop and place this on top of the fabric and the inner hoop. Once you've done this, pull the fabric so that the edges of your loops are sitting right to the edge of that bamboo frame. Once you've done this all the way around, tighten up the top of the hoop. And here's our beautiful loopy punch needle in a bamboo frame. To tidy up the back, I just fold these edges in and do a running stitch along here to gather it together. And here's the two finished pieces side by side. On the left we have the framed rectangular piece with the flat stitches on display. And here we have our beautiful circular scrappy punch needle with the loops on show. I hope you have fun making your very own scrappy punch needle piece. Feel free to stick around and watch another video.